So we have a pretty good looking button now. The next thing we're going to do is work on our input. And we're going to start off with a very simple basis, and then we're going to expand that and make it highly dynamic and support advanced features like validation and that sort of thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file. I'm just going to call that one my input, and that's just going to show that it's a custom input as opposed to a default HTML input. Let's head over there and start creating our input. So much like before, I'm going to copy over this template just because it's going to be so similar, and we're going to focus on the input for now. I'm just going to delete all of the content because we're going to be updating most of this as well. And then we're going to go ahead and start doing our input. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with our base input, and this is what we're going to build on top of. We're going to give it a type of text, and that's going to be static for now. We may customize this later on. And now we're just going to make sure this is working. I'm going to save this one off and head over to app.vue and try everything out. Let's go ahead and import my input. So I'm just going to grab that one here. And of course, that's going to come from the my input file. And we do need to register that component as well. So I'm going to do that. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and render one. Again, we can use this kind of syntax, or if you prefer, you can use this syntax. I like to have the lowercase one though, so that's what I'm going to use. Now that we have that one there, we're not going to pass any values yet, but if we save this off, we should see the input appear, and so we do. So the next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of basic styling before we start making some more interesting features. So I'm going to head back to the my input file now, and we're going to base this styling on our button just so it all kind of looks very cohesive. I'm going to jump down here and grab this style sheet for now and copy it over, and then we're going to customize it. So what we're going to do for now is obviously delete the things we're not interested in. For now, I'm just going to change this to be input here. I'm going to delete the validation stuff. And what we are going to keep is, well, let's just save it off and see how it looks. It looks a little bit silly. I can't even see the input anymore. So what we're going to do is have that that border. I'm just going to say it's 1 pixel solid silver. And let's save this one off now. We're getting a bit closer. We probably don't need the cursor hover. And we're going to get rid of, let's say, I think this is pretty good for now actually. So the next thing we're going to do is actually add a label so we know what the input is going to be. So I'm going to jump up here and add a div. And inside of this, we're going to have a label. We're going to specify what the content is going to be soon by passing in a name attribute. And then we're going to close this one off. Let's go ahead and declare this name attribute first, or this name prop rather, and then we're going to be able to access that. So I'm going to create a new props key. Inside of here, we're going to have a name, and this one's type is just going to be a string, and we're going to go ahead and say this one is required. Now that we have that, we should be able to close off this div and see everything rendering again. So if we save this off, we're actually not going to see a name, and the reason for that is because we haven't passed one yet. And if we take a look at the console, we're actually going to get an error possibly because we've said this is required and we haven't passed one. Apparently we're not getting an error. That's a little bit unusual, but we should be passing the name anyway, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to head over to my app file, and then we're going to pass the name in here. So I'm going to save a name. It's just going to be equal to username in this particular case. Let's save this one off, and now the username is appearing, which is exactly what I was expecting. I'm going to head back to the input component now, and we're going to add a little bit more styling in here just to make things look a little bit nicer. So the first thing I'm going to do is style this div. Because we are using the scope attribute here, this div styling is only going to apply to this component. I'm going to give it a display of flex for now, and that's going to make everything line up in a straight line. And the next thing I'm going to do is change the flex direction to make it a column. So it's going to be the label on top of the input. So if we make this one column here, save it off, there we go. The next thing I'm going to do is add some margin around the input because I don't like how close the button and the input are to each other here. So I'm going to jump down here and have a margin of just, let's say 5 pixels on the y-axis, and we're going to have 0 on the x-axis. And that looks a lot better. If I click here, we see we have quite a bit of padding here, so I'm going to get rid of that one as well. All I'm going to do is change the padding to be 10 pixels on all directions. And now this looks a lot better. I'm pretty happy with this where it is, but we are going to make one more improvement, and that's going to be changing the default font family. So I'm going to head over to app.vue, and we're going to style that here. I've removed the scope attribute, so this is going to apply to the entire application. So it's perfectly fine to have these global styles. I like to put them in my app file because that's at the very top of the component hierarchy. I'm just going to change the font family in here, and I'm going to make it Arial, which is a pretty nice font. And there we go. Everything is looking pretty good now. Definitely a good place to be. The last thing I'm going to do is make it so when you click on this label, it's going to automatically focus this input for us, and that's going to be good for accessibility. The way we're going to do that is using our bindings again. So normally you would put a for in here and put in something such as, let's say, username, and then you would put an ID of username down here. And because these are related now, when you click on the label, it's going to find the input with the ID of username, and it's going to focus it. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to save it off, and a click on username is going to focus this input. What we want to do is make this a little bit more dynamic. So instead of hard coding username here, what I'm going to do is use the binding, and we're going to bind to the name attribute or the name prop. Now that we've bound to that, we're going to also do a binding on ID down here and bind to name. And now this is going to dynamically evaluate this JavaScript expression, which is going to be a string variable in this case, and it's going to attach it to ID and for respectively. Let's save this one off and head back to the browser, and we're going to see if this is still going to work. If I click on username, it's going to focus the input correctly. And this is all good and well, and I think this is a good place to leave this one at. What we're going to do next is look at how we can add some dynamic validation.